The idea of today is actually, for me, a first time doing this for this type of audience, which means I'm scared as hell, sweating like hell, and I'm going to need a lot of beer in the evening to recover from it. But I would really could use your feedback. What I'm going to try to do is thought leadership, which means nothing technical. That's one, for your audience. For this audience, that's dangerous. And secondly, you guys are going to have to think. So I'm hoping that after this, you'll at least get a beer. Maybe one from me. But why I'm doing this is because lately, the last year, I've been involved a lot into conversations with C-level and with technical experts. And guess what? What used to be 10 years ago already something where there was a big gap, today there's more or less an ocean between them. So what I'm trying to do is bring them together, and I'm going to give you some tips when you talk to your management. So what we're going to talk about, we all want the cloud. And then I'm going to discuss a few use cases that you can actually use today, instead of saying to all of your managers, no, we're not going to go to the cloud. We're also going to talk about modeling apps, workloads, how you need to do it, what you have to think about it, and how your management has to support you in that as well. And then I want to talk about a new role called the cloud architect. Sorry, I'm Belgian and I always make that mistake, so you'll hear me saying architect a lot. It means architect. Why do I want to talk about it? Because, well, you see a lot of job openings today saying, oh, we need a cloud architect, and you're going to solicit it for it, and then you come there and they tell you, we need you to do this and this and this. That's not the job. Trust me, many companies make that mistake. And I also want to talk about infrastructure as code, which becomes more and more important. Unfortunately, again, there's a huge misunderstanding between management, what they think it is, and you guys, what you probably know it is. So how can you do it? And then, if time permits, Q&A, and otherwise, well, this is E to EVC, so most questions come in the bar anyway. And as I said, I really appreciate the feedback because I want to take this further on. And unfortunately, you're my guinea pigs, so you're the first audience that actually sees this. So, everybody wants to go to the cloud, or at least that's what management thinks, because they went to Gartner, IDC, Forrester, or whatever event that costs a couple of €1,000, go there to have great dinners, fantastic receptions, steal the best swag from all the vendors, and somebody in that keynote said, if you're not at the cloud now as a business, you're done. Move everything you have. Why? Well, because that same guy in the keynote said, it's about the money. Your data center costs you €5 million. The cloud is cheap. And whenever you go to the cloud, your IT guys won't tell you anymore, sir, if you want to deploy this workload, that will take around 2 weeks of preparation, 1 week of testing, and then we'll be live. No, the cloud can do this in 15 minutes. All you need is a credit card. No worries, no problem. Then he comes back and says, what about automation? I've noticed in the cloud, everything is automated. You just push a few buttons and it works. I mean, even my secretary can do this. If that would be true, we would be in real problems already today. And even better, we have so many outages in our own data center, and the cloud, unbreakable. I guess we all know lately that's not true as well. 2 weeks ago, even Salesforce, or was it 3 weeks ago, had a serious outage, losing data from the customers, which is a very painful case. And when those people read the SLAs, they saw that, well, sorry, we lost the data. And last but not least, it's all about speed, according to the manager. I already said this more or less, but how can we deliver the same speed as a cloud that can deploy fast and can be up and running, all of these things? How can we do that in our data centers? Unfortunately, this is us. The moment our manager is telling that, we try to give them some counter arguments, right? We're going to say, what about security in the cloud? I'm not so sure about that. Here we're behind our firewalls, we know what we're doing, we've got control over it. Whatever happens in there, I have no idea what's happening. Second, of course, is especially when we are living in Europe. In the US, it's a little bit different because a lot of these data centers are actually in the US. But me as a Belgian, whenever I upload something in the cloud, where is my data? I don't know. Is it in Ireland? Is it in Amsterdam? Or did I make a mistake and is it in Singapore? We don't know. we do have proof that there are outages in those data centers. Although he said, you know, unbreakable, you come with some articles from, especially from those guys from the UK, the register, hey, look at this. There are breaks, there are issues. How are we gonna deal with that? Because when there's not such a high data center, we'll fix it. When there's not such an Azure or Amazon or Google, yeah, we're gonna wait until they fix it, which is also a good way. What about control? Everything in my own data center, we control, we can decide upon it. They just have a set of limited service that they offer and we have no control over it. If they update their service tomorrow, we have to follow it, whether we like it or not. It's the way it is. I always try to tell at that moment in those one-on-one meetings, well, with a couple of people, and we say, you know, why not go somewhere in the middle and actually start using the cloud for certain use cases? Of course, I could say as a backup vendor, backup as a service, disaster recovery as a service, move that backup to the cloud. But there are actually a few other ones that probably are even more interesting. So I want to talk about those. Now, before I start about those 3 use cases I have, let me just quickly show you what I mean with my environment, which I'm going to talk about. And what we have is a typical workload, and if somebody knows why it's shaking so hard, that would be very appreciated. And what it is, it's a front tier, it's a middle tier, and a back end, right? SQL Server, maybe an Oracle database, some workloads, and you know, a web page or something like that. Today, running on VMware, Hyper-V, maybe some other Hyper-V, it doesn't matter. This is what my typical workload is. In reality, when you look into my data center, you're going to see that we have a load balancer. We've got multiple websites serving that front end. We've got in the middle tier the workload, which is separated into different components, talking to each other. There might be routing here in between. I mean, I think even my Visio skills are not that good, as you can see. Could be a lot in between. And then we actually have something in the back, which could be a standalone SQL, could be a SQL all on its own, could be other databases with specific, you know, but still running virtualized. Now what is the thing here is, when we look at this, this is my production, and at a certain moment, whether we like it or not, even when it runs in the cloud, we're going to have to do patching, we're going to have to do updating, we're going to have to do testing, we might even have developers that need to work on it. For all the years that I worked in IT companies before I joined this one, the biggest issue was that whenever I did testing, patching, whatever, this was my actual situation and everything was more or less running on one simple, either physical box, not that old, but 15 years ago, or in a virtual machine about 5 years ago. Which means in reality, oops, wrong button, all the rest, load balancing, all these interactions, all these potential firewalls or whatever that's in between there is never tested when we do development, when we do testing, when we drive disaster recovery. Why is that? Very simple. I didn't have the time, or my team had the time to actually set this all up and to do some real-time testing. And second, we basically didn't have the money or the resources to buy enough hardware to exactly simulate the actual workload, right? So, why did I start using the cloud? Very simple, because I could use my credit card, don't tell my boss, but I could use my credit card, create some resources, buy myself some compute, and I could mimic exactly the same thing. How do I do this? I literally restore my backups from the day before into the cloud. At that point in time, I can fully simulate my production environment, and I can let all of my developers test, develop, do their acceptance. Advantages, they actually have a full working workload the way it is. Second, they're working on real live production data, although afterwards we kill it, because otherwise it keeps using money. But it's not fake data, so they're actually doing something on what was real the day before. Second scenario is exactly the same thing. We take a workload, whatever it is, and we need to do patching. How do we do it today? Unless you're a major bank or something like that, you probably don't have the resources to really do the testing. So what happens, and lately Microsoft seems to be specialist in something and releasing a patch which breaks a law. So what I do is I literally restore. I got my real lifetime environment in Azure, in Amazon, wherever it is running. Test, does it break? Sorry boss, we can't change because A, B, C. Or it works, and I've got a full documented change plan that I can also, change advisory board. If you don't work with a change advisory board, be lucky. If you do, you actually have that document that proves, look, we tested it for real, right? And the last one is I actually use it for disaster recovery testing as well. By the way, who of you ever test their backups or replications or any other type of disaster recovery you have in place once a year? Raise your hands. Keep those hands up. So we're about half, I think, and a few guys that are not paying attention, so I'm going to not count those. What about every half year? Interesting. What about every month? Don't worry, you're not the only ones. Actually, I'm surprised to see so many. If I do this at an event and I ask this question where there's a lot of managers in it, who of you tests this every day? The entire room is like that. Are you sure? Can we ask this to your IT guys? And then they don't know it, but this is another potential you have. Now, imagine that you want to use these three examples, right? The three use cases we did. There are two things here. One is you actually start using this cloud and start learning how it works, what it does, what is different with cloud and on-premises. Oh, by the way, with cloud, I am not only talking about the Amazons and the Azures and the Googles and whatever of this world. A service provider close to you is a cloud as well, right? It can be that they actually offer this, and we know some service providers, because that's where I stole that idea from, that do this and that offer this to their customers. But secondly, you make your management happy as well. Because now at least they can say when they're golfing with their buddies, yeah, my guys are using the cloud. We're a modern company, no problem. Unfortunately, if you want to do this, you're gonna have to start thinking about a few things, because I kind of like to say it's easy. You take your backups and you restore it to the cloud and you're done, you can do your testing. I wish it was that easy. There are a few things we're gonna have to talk about. Are you ready for this? It's time to declare your applications, because one of the biggest mistakes we see is when they start doing this, well, Mike, this was a great idea, but we tried it out for a couple of weeks and it doesn't work. Then let's see. And what happens is they want to test this on an Exchange server or any type of mail application that you have. Unfortunately, an Exchange server is more than just an Exchange server. If you're going to restore that to Azure, and then want to do testing, of course the email service is not going to work, because where's Active Directory? Where's DNS? Maybe you are using DHCP for that server call, I hope not, but who knows, you're doing this. What is your MX record? How are you going to divide it into the two boxes, and so on and so forth. There's more than just the mail server itself, the workload, that completes that workload. Compare it with a postal, what you can see in the picture. I mean, you can send a letter and it arrives somewhere and it costs you a stamp. But there's a guy or a girl that needs to pick up that letter. It needs to go to a sorting center. It might needs to be sent to another country, to a region, sorted again. And then we have the typical guy on the bicycle coming over to put a letter into your box, hoping the dog is not going to buy it. It's an entire process of different components. And I hope, because I know you guys, at least that's what they always tell me, these are the experts in Europe and US and so on. But the amount of companies that have exactly no idea how a workload works is massively. It's just massively. I wish companies would pay money to just declare applications, because I would be a great consultant. I'm making tons of money. I was about to say something else, but you're on camera. It's important that this is the first step you take. What exactly is my application? By the way, sometimes you see complete crazy things that are needed to get something running. On the other hand, this is maybe for tip number 4, if you're not 100% certain, let's just declare your application, restore it to the cloud. If it doesn't work, well, you're forgetting something. Time to figure out what it is. Okay? And then the next thing you have to think of, and trust me, this can take a while, really take a while, is if we're going to do this, we're gonna have to think about somebody that is going to play the role of a cloud architect. I told you I'm gonna try not to use it, but you need it. And here's the thing, this is what I see in the newspaper. I need a cloud product manager, cloud executive. Oh, I love that name. I don't have that title. I want a cloud systems engineer, a cloud software engineer, and so on and so on. Many of these people think that one of these titles has to be somebody that can build a huge cloud, multi-tenant, with portals, and so on. Well, those guys exist, but they're only used at the big boys or at your local service provider that actually have to build it. What I mean by a cloud architect in your environments is something completely different, and is asking for a completely different skill set. Now, whenever your boss comes to you and he says, we need this, start talking to your boss and say, let's see what the requirements are. Now, to make it easy for you guys, I basically listed them. At least that is what I think the guy or girl should do, right? So first, as I said, it requires completely different skills. Forget about the guy that develops this multi-tenant portal and so on, and writes and you know, all that stuff. That's not the idea. This person is somebody who needs a vision. A vision of where is this company heading to? And that vision has to align with, unfortunately, the business. Well, unfortunately, that's how we make money and get our paycheck running. But he has not only to think about the cloud, he also has to align this with the current vision running in the company. Trust me when I say aligning those two to make that hybrid cloud is not an easy thing to do, especially if the company has been doing, you know, business for 30, 40 years. That means their IT infrastructure, their vision is 10, 15 years old. Changing that vision is going to be a very painful game. But he needs to have that vision, and he needs to be able to write that out on paper to see where are we heading. Also very important is he cannot be, how should I say it, influenced by financial services within a company. Because what happens a lot is, you are, sorry for pointing, but you are the cloud architect. Now it's your job to get us onto OPEX as soon as possible so we can drop all the CAPEX. I want to pay per month. I want to know how much is going to be per month, which is impossible, by the way, if you use cloud services, because it varies on what you're using. But forget about paying $3 million upfront for a storage share network. I want to pay per month. He or she has to be strong to say, yeah, but hold on. Point after point, right? Sure. He of course needs to embrace cloud technology. That means if all of the IT staff in his company says we don't want to go to the cloud because of all the reasons I already showed you, he's the one that's going to have to go to the technical guys and defend, look, we need to get there. Maybe not directly, but we need to get there, we need to embrace it, we need to use it, both of the technologies, but this is something we have to go into. So he has to convince those people as well. Can you imagine trying to convince end managers not to go too fast, and then IT people try to go a little bit faster? So really, really difficult. So he really needs to have that passion as well. And the main goal of that person is improving the business, which means he or she is going to have to investigate which services can go to the cloud that will actually improve the business, and which we prefer to stay on premises because of various other reasons. I spoke to a manager, I think 2 weeks ago, and his vision of the cloud was just simply picking up every virtual machine he had and moving it because he believed that would be improving the business. After I explained to him that there are also other types of cloud, like email, maybe only bring email already to the cloud, or maybe only put, like Salesforce, that type of data to the cloud, or Expensify, probably my favorite cloud solution, simply because it makes it way more easier to get my money back from my expense receipts, and I've got all of those. So he really needs to have have to look into it, and he needs to be certain that whatever we're moving needs to actually improve the business and not make the managers happy. He or she is also going to have extremely strong communication skills, leadership, because he's bringing everything together. Why is that? Because we haven't talked about this, but it's not about IT professionals alone. Developers are going to come into play as well. Now we all know the current struggle between IT professionals and developers that never worked. Always been a cat and mouse game. I'm not saying who's the cat and who's the mouse. Now they need to come together. Because if you're doing this, it's going to be a cooperation of the two teams working together. I can assure you that's probably even difficult, more difficult than talking to management and convincing them. So he needs to be able to do that. And also, he has to have good project management skills. Because if you're doing this, if you're going to go for this vision, it's a long-term strategy. Forget about short-term, it's a long-term strategy. And then one of the skills you really have to investigate is what about relationship with vendors and negotiation? Because what we normally do now, if we buy a solution, whether it's software solution or hardware, is we talk, we try to pay as less as possible, which is logical. And in the end, we are going to run it in our center, data center. So everything which has to do with maintenance and monitoring the solution and making sure it's running, that's our concern. Suddenly all of these questions go to the cloud vendor. What happens if you go down? How long will it take before you're back up? What do you guarantee me? And if you don't make it, what's the penalty? What if you lose data? How am I going to get it back? All new type of questions you need to ask, which we never had to do because we were responsible for it ourselves. Not that simple. And he also needs to avoid just a bunch of clouds. It's too easy today to see how many different solutions there are out there in the world. And like I said, right, Expensify, that's great for expenses. Salesforce, that's fantastic, I'm going to use this. And in Azure, I'm going to drop a few virtual machines and some workloads. Oh, by the way, I saw Amazon is cheaper for whatever other service, and I'm going to dump some services as well. In the end, what you're going to get is somebody who needs a lot of credit cards to make sure to maintain everything. Just picking some service is not a good idea. You have to keep it as a whole. You have to keep the overview. My question?
Not question. So more than credit card, you might also going to need to pay. I'm thinking aloud for services to integrate things.
Yes.
So you've got this expense thing, and then you've got your accounting system which is somewhere else.
Correct. Yeah. Very good point.
That's
yeah.
a nightmare, I believe.
Don't get me started on that one. But yeah, it's a big nightmare. Trust me on that one. Some will make it easy. Some will make it extremely difficult. No APIs, those kind of things, and so on and so forth. And last but not least, if you talk about the cloud architect, he needs to have still the technical skills. I don't say he needs to know every engine in depth. That's probably going to be impossible. But at least he still needs to have that technical skills. Otherwise, well, we will just run over him and say, yeah, that's the best solution. Move along. So it's a rather difficult job. One mistake you can't make, but don't tell your managers I told you that. If you're going to pick someone within your own teams who now is a data center architect, whoever that person is, please tell him or her, this is different. I'm not saying he or she can't do it, but if he starts on a new job the same way as he was doing for years as a data center architect, it's not going to work. It's just not going to work. He needs to start thinking different with all these points we mentioned, and he needs to do this from day one. Externally hiring is also not always the best option, because what's the big problem with an external one coming in? He never learned how it was before, which means it's way more difficult to start telling to all of you, yeah, I know you did this for 5 years, but forget about it, it's bad, we're going to do this. I mean, we don't like to hear that, right? Something we've been doing for 5 years, 10 years, and then move along, we're going to do it differently. So it's very difficult, and this is a decision every manager should not take lightly. But do know that in the near future every business will need this type of role. So it's better to start thinking about it already than get screwed over when it's over there and you suddenly need it. He also needs to move the business away from just getting the infrastructure up and running. Again, this is really about making sure that besides up and running, now you're going to have to look at managing a workload. Everybody deployed something in a cloud, again, service provider or one of the big boys. How do you monitor it? How do you manage this? How do you make sure that if something's wrong, your help desk can effectively do something and fix it? It's not that easy. That means rethinking the strategy which you've been doing for so many years. Another one of his course. And as I said, that person needs to go at the job and needs to think what I'm starting here is a long-term year after year, maybe 10-year project. It's not a sprint. It's not in 6 months, here we go, done. We've got some cloud, we've got some infrastructure, we're done. It's really a long-term project, right? And this is probably another one of his final requirements. He needs to break down silos, not only between developers and IT professionals and management, but within the IT professional. I don't know how many companies of you still work like that, but remember the good old days? I'm the networking team, don't even think about touching my network. I'm the storage guy. You want some storage for your virtual machine? Fill in a request and in 3 weeks we'll give you a LAN or something like that. All of these silos need to be broken down because when you're going to go to the cloud, they're just building blocks and everybody has to work together. Seeing how painful this is to grow. Some companies again are already further, other ones are going to have a real difficult time in the future, unfortunately. Alright. And the last thing I want to talk about is that you have to start thinking as infrastructure as code. No, we're not going to do development, trust me. At least I am not going to do it. I would be very terrible at it. But you do have to start thinking about this when you start deploying because the jobs are going to change in the future. By the way, those people who believe that there will be less IT jobs because, we do automation, we've got cloud, we don't need no IT professionals anymore, we're going to just need more. What is different is the jobs is going to change. That person who's doing his entire day nothing than opening doors, racking a server, putting cables in it, if you're that person, I'm sorry. You're going to have to rethink what you're doing. You're going to have to start studying because you need to do something else or you will be out of a job. But if you change, trust me, there's more than work than enough, okay? So you really have to adapt yourself to the future. I always compare this with the industry revolution of cars. When they started building cars, everything was done manually. And then suddenly somebody invented the robot arm. Well, suddenly, it took a long time, a lot of years. That certain things on that car were built and were automated. And all the people that were doing the screwdriver thingy just got out of a job. Well, everybody that adapted themselves still find a job and there's still a lot of work. But in the industry, in the auto industry, it took 40, 50 years before that transformation was complete. In IT, it seems to be only taking 5 years, which is extremely fast. Which means we need to change quicker than anything else, okay? Don't be afraid about thinking and making those changes, infrastructure as code. It all sounds terrible. It's DevOps, we want to move away from it, leave me alone. But it's not really that difficult. If you really want to, it's rather easy to learn. And it's the next step in your company infrastructure, because in the end it's about those building blocks again. But instead of saying now we've got a mail server, which is a service, we know that. It's running on a operating system. That's another building block. And then, alright, we need compute, we need that amount of CPU, and we need that amount of memory. And you start just splitting it up. What you normally now call a virtual machine or a physical box, you're going to start splitting up. But you're going to split up everything in little blocks, meaning if you have a subnet, 255.255.255.0, that's a building block. If you have an IP address privately in your organization, it's a building block. Is it connected to the internet? and it's got a public IP as well through routing or whatever you're doing, that's a building block. So every little detail about that should be a building block. The moment you have that completely scoped out for your workload and all attached to each other, infrastructure as code is easy as it can be. It's literally writing some stuff and declaring those little building blocks, and in the end attaching them together, and you're done. And there are big advantages on this, because that means redeploying, oh, sorry, I actually have to be here. Redeploying a potential workload that crashed or whatever happened is going to be way more easier, because who of you, and I'm sure everybody has had this before, you know, something went wrong, you start sweating because you know you're going to have to rebuild the virtual machine. What were the settings? What batch level am I on? What was the IP I was using? Was that fixed? Was that fixed? How did I do this? We don't know. We document it maybe when we deploy the server, and then every changes we make, we don't care. We forget to document it. So whenever something's wrong, if you do this as code, it's easy to just take it and redeploy it and get it to the same level. But it also gives you the potential to ship your code faster, because if you have this and you can deploy it as code, well, guess how easy it is to redeploy this, maybe with your service provider, maybe somewhere in cloud resources with the big players, and let them do some testing on code, ready, and then as code, develop it to production. Your developers are going to love this, because for them it means way faster working, and for you it will be in the long run easier as well. But as you can see, you still have work, because you still need to deploy this, right? And then it's actually going to improve the overall performance as well. You know why that is? Because you don't make any mistakes anymore. Let's be honest, as an IT professional, when we're doing something and we're deploying stuff and it's not fully automated or it's not as code, we do this after 10 times with our eyes closed. That's the moment we start to make mistakes, that's the moment the performance goes down, and that's also the moment that we realize, how is it possible that it's slower while I did exactly the same thing and you don't see it anymore? That will be solved as well. Like this. So as I said, it looks very difficult, but in reality, if you start working with it, if you give yourself the time, it is possible. As an example, we did an experiment in our own company. We took a first line help desk support engineer. We gave him some documentation on the web. We said, study this, and we're hoping by the end of this week that you can deploy a simple, it was simple, I'll admit that, but it was a simple workload, a web server, a middle tier, and a database, and deployed automatically as code on VMware. He succeeded. Very young guy, just of school, first line help desk, and it was possible. So he might be just a very smart guy, and there's also potential, but I think it really isn't that difficult, but you have to start on it and you have to do this, okay? It also means try to get the time from your boss to actually study it, because that's the next problem, of course, convincing him that you need to learn this, okay? And then you got your cloning. I talked about this. Cloning is at that point in time very, very simple. All right. Quick recap. Well, I'm going to give you a little bit more time back. Don't say to your managers, no, we do not want to go to the cloud because A, B, C, D, E, all of the reasons and good reasons that you have. On the other hand, try to convince your manager not to come in and say, I want to go to the cloud because money, overhead, blah, 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 blah. Go into the middle and say, you know what, let's start using this cloud for certain services and build from there, get the knowledge, get the experience, and then we'll see in a couple of years, a couple of months, depending on how fast you are, what we're going to do. So benefit from it today for some services that are not production, but that actually can make your life easier if you do it through the cloud. Whatever workload you have today, make sure you have it completely thought out, that you know what is needed, and that you have all of these different components. Trust me when I say you will make mistakes in this one, and it's absolutely not abnormal that you're going to make mistakes, because everything today is so connected that it's almost impossible to guess what you need for a workload. If your company is starting to think about a cloud architect, it's not the typical data center architect with a new name and maybe a pay raise, if they get a pay raise. This is a complete new set of skills that this person needs to have to get that cloud era and to get the on-premises era together into a hybrid type of era. And last but not least, if you're going to start this to make your life easier, start thinking about infrastructure as code. Your developers are going to love it. You are going to make your life easier, and in the end, in a couple of years, you will have no more choice, and this will be actually what you're doing all the time. Maybe a stupid quick example to prove this last point is, but I don't know if Thomas has talked about it or Dr. Miro has talked about it, but lately everything within Microsoft, you can do a lot with PowerShell, but if you're going to do it through a UI, good luck. A lot of the things are simply not in the UI anymore. So this is going to be important to work on. And with that, thank you very much. Yes?